Snow howled through the forest as a Navy SEAL moved silently toward his target. Then his K9 froze and ran. Hanging from a cabin porch were two helpless puppies, barely alive. What the SEAL didn't know was that saving them would trigger a deadly trap meant to kill him. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Captain Blake moved through the snow with practiced silence, every step measured, every breath controlled. This mission was classified even by Special Operations standards, a retrieval that could shift the balance of an unseen war. Failure wasn't an option. At his side moved Shadow, his German Shepherd K9, trained to read danger before it appeared. They had survived gunfire, ambush, and nights colder than this. Trust between them was absolute. Sensors and radios could fail, but Shadow never did. Tonight, they were deep behind enemy lines, minutes from the extraction route. Blake checked his watch, recalculated, and pressed forward. The storm thickened, swallowing sound and light. As the mission clock continued to bleed away with cold patience learned over deployments, the wind shifted suddenly, carrying something unfamiliar through the storm. Shadow slowed, ears lifting, his body stiffening mid-stride. Blake felt the change instantly. This wasn't caution, it was alarm. Shadow's nose cut low through the snow, breathing fast, muscles tight. A soft whine escaped his throat, barely audible over the wind. Blake whispered a command, but the dog didn't respond. His focus was locked somewhere off route, deep in the trees. Blake hesitated. The mission demanded precision and timing. Deviating now could expose them both. But Shadow had never been wrong, not once. After a brief pause, Blake exhaled sharply. "All right," he murmured. "Show me." Without another word, he followed the K9 into the storm, unaware that everything was about to change. The trees thinned suddenly, revealing a small cabin buried beneath snow and time. Its windows were dark, its door hanging crooked, swaying slightly in the wind. Blake slowed, instinct screaming. Abandoned structures were never empty by accident, not out here. Shadow stopped dead. Then he growled. Blake followed the dog's gaze to the front porch, and his breath caught. Two small puppies hung from crude ropes tied to the wooden beam above. Their bodies trembled weakly, paws twitching, eyes barely open. They were alive. But not for long. For a moment, the storm seemed to fall silent. Rage surged through Blake's chest, hot and sharp. Who would do this? Out here in the middle of nowhere? This wasn't random cruelty. It was deliberate. Shadow whined urgently, pulling toward the porch, desperate. Blake's hand tightened around his knife as a single thought cut through the shock. This place wasn't just wrong. It was waiting. Blake's eyes flicked to his watch. The mission window was shrinking fast. Every second here increased the risk of exposure, of failure, of never making it home. Command hadn't sent him to save lives tonight, especially not four-legged ones tied to a porch, but Shadow refused to move. The K9 planted himself between Blake and the trees, eyes locked on the puppies, chest rising with strained breaths. This wasn't instinct alone. It was insistence. Blake swore under his breath. He scanned the tree line, the cabin, the shadows beyond. 2 minutes. He muttered, God, if this was a mistake, it would cost everything. Blake stepped onto the porch, knife already in his hand. The rope fibers were frozen stiff, biting into his gloves as he reached for the first knot. Shadow stayed close, low and alert. Every muscle coiled tight. Then dash click. Blake froze. A sharp metallic sound echoed beneath the porch, almost swallowed by the wind. Years of combat training screamed the truth at once. He yanked his hand back and spun too late. The tree line erupted with movement. Shadows broke loose from the snow-covered rocks as figures rose from concealment, weapons snapping into position. Red laser dots sliced through the storm, dancing across the cabin walls. It's a trap, Blake muttered, heart hammering. The puppies weren't bait by accident. They were leverage. Gunfire cracked through the air, splintering wood. Blake dove, rolling off the porch as rounds tore through where he'd stood seconds earlier. Shadow lunged beside him, teeth bared, a low snarl ripping from his chest. Blake hit the ground hard, already firing back, controlled and precise. Snow exploded around them as enemies closed in from multiple angles. The storm howled louder now. And the real fight had begun. Blake moved on instinct. Years of training taking over as the world narrowed to motion and sound. He fired in short, controlled bursts, never wasting a round, never staying in one place for more than a heartbeat. Snow kicked up around him as bullets tore through the white ground where he had been seconds before. Shadow was already moving. At Blake's signal, the canine disappeared into the storm, a dark blur cutting low and fast. A shout rang out from the trees, then stopped abruptly. The enemies had expected hesitation, panic. They got precision and fury instead. Blake used the cabin as cover, circling wide, forcing the attackers to split. One rushed too close. Shadow reappeared, striking from the side, sending the man crashing into the snow. Blake was there instantly, neutralizing the threat and moving on without pause. The storm worked in their favor. Visibility was poor, communication worse. Blake listened between gunshots, tracking footsteps, breath, the faint crunch of snow. One by one, the attackers revealed themselves and paid for it. Minutes stretched like hours. Then slowly the gunfire faded. The forest fell quiet again, broken only by the wind and Blake's steady breathing. He scanned the perimeter. Weapon raised, waiting. Nothing. The trap had failed. Blake knelt, resting a hand on Shadow's shoulder as the canine returned to his side, chest heaving but eyes sharp. They were still standing. The enemies were not. Blake moved back onto the porch, the storm no longer the loudest thing in his head. The puppies hung limp now, their tiny bodies trembling from cold and fear. He worked fast, cutting the ropes clean, catching each one before they could fall. They were light, too light. Alive, but barely. Blake tucked them inside his jacket, sharing his body heat as Shadow pressed close, nose gently nudging them, whining softly as if urging them to breathe. One puppy stirred, letting out a weak sound. Blake exhaled, a tension he hadn't realized he was holding finally loosening. "You're okay," he whispered, more to himself than them. Shadow lay down, positioning his body like a shield, eyes still alert to the trees. Even now he stood guard, after all the violence. This moment felt fragile, quiet, and worth everything. Blake checked his watch again. Somehow, against every calculation, there was still time. He adjusted his route, recalibrated his extraction point, and moved with renewed focus. The mission wasn't over, but it wasn't lost either. Keeping low, he advanced through the forest, Shadow moving ahead, alert but steady now. The storm covered their tracks, erased the evidence of the firefight. Enemy communications were silent. Whatever they had planned here ended tonight. At the final checkpoint, Blake secured the objective, transmitting the confirmation code with gloved fingers numb from cold. The response came back clean. Mission complete. As the extraction signal echoed faintly in the distance, Blake looked down at the puppies nestled safely against him. Shadow walking close at his side. They hadn't just survived the mission. They had beaten it on their own terms. The helicopter lights cut through the storm like a promise. Blake stood still for a moment, letting the cold wind wash over him as the adrenaline finally faded. Shadow sat at his side, calm now, watchful. Exactly as he had been at the start. The puppies slept, warm and alive, their tiny breaths steady against Blake's chest. Somewhere ahead, they would have a future one they were never meant to have. Blake rested his hand on Shadow's head, a quiet understanding passing between them. Orders could be rewritten. Lives couldn't. As the aircraft lifted them into the dark sky, one truth remained clear: loyalty doesn't follow commands. It follows the heart.